Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. We bring you thought-provoking guests and topics every week to challenge your thinking about leadership. Our aim is to help you become the leader that you wish you always had as we learn together and lead together. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honored today to be joined by Rusty Shelton. Rusty is the founder and CEO of Zilker Media. And he's also the author of a book called The Authority Advantage, which is about building leadership based on impact, not ego. And we're going to talk a lot about this. We're going to talk about this word impact. We're going to talk about ego. We're going to talk about what is thought leadership and how do you build it and why it's important. So I'm really excited about today's discussion. Without any further ado, Rusty, I'd love to hear about your background through all of your career and what led you to be focused on this word impact, this word about ego and leaving your ego at the door, if you like, and what thought leadership means to you. Let's start with what led you into this work in the first place.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Mick. And I've really been looking forward to this, and I appreciate you having me. So as I was mentioning to you, based here in Austin, Texas, grew up here, went to the University of Texas. And while I was at UT, I did an internship at a book publicity firm here in Austin. Kind of didn't know what I wanted to do. I was a general communications major and jumped into that internship my junior year and just loved it. I was fascinated with the book industry. I loved the ability to help an author go out and make an impact at scale. And that's one of the great things about books from the beginning of time is it took ideas, and instead of those ideas being limited to a one-to-one or one-to-few basis, it really set up an opportunity to make an impact at scale. And so I just was really passionate about it. I liked that job so much, Mick, that I told the owner of that business that I would intern for free. I'd work for free my senior year if he promised me a job as a book publicist when I graduated university. And so thankfully, he accepted that pretty quickly. So I started out as a book publicist, and my job was to cold call radio stations, cold call TV stations, and try to charm them into having our authors on their radio show or on their TV show. And had a blast with that. I moved into business development pretty quickly and spent first 7 years of my career at that agency. All we did was PR there, Mick. And so one of the things that I saw, that was about the time that social media was really growing. I recognized that authors needed more than just PR. And so I jumped out and started my first agency in 2010 at the age of 29. We sold that in 2016 to Forbes Books, where I still do a lot of work. And Zilker Media, as you referenced, is our new agency, kind of taking everything that we learned about how to make authors into thought leaders. And now we're really applying that to coaches, to senior leaders, to entrepreneurs, and helping them understand kind of the magic in not being positioned as an operator with something to sell, but instead being positioned as what they are, right? A mission-driven thought leader with something to teach.
All right, brilliant, Rusty. I'm really looking forward to this. I'd love to unpack a lot of that. I want to start with why books? What about books inspired you?
I think it was the impact side of books. And I loved it on two sides. Number one, again, the magic of books from my perspective, and certainly other formats like your great podcast, but it's taking content that used to be confined to the people fortunate enough to be in the boardroom or fortunate enough to be in the room, and the ability to make that impact at scale. So that was one thing I really loved. The other thing I loved about working with authors is I felt like I had the opportunity to get smarter with each client that I worked with. I mean, we were fortunate enough to work with people like Gary Keller, so co-founder of Keller Williams Realty, and Chicken Soup for the Soul, and Tom Rath, and Sally Hogshead, just some of the best leaders in the world. And it was an opportunity not just to help them make an impact, but also, I felt like personal development wise, it really was fulfilling to me to do that. But it also just, if you think about the disruption within, really at the intersection of kind of three industries. So the publishing industry, the media industry, as well as the PR industry. I mean, those industries have changed like many others just dramatically over the last couple of decades. And from my perspective, they've largely changed for the better. And what I'm really passionate about today, and you referenced, the new book, The Authority Advantage, Building Thought Leadership Focused on Impact, Not Ego. I mean, the magic from my perspective is a entrepreneur in Austin, Texas can talk to an entrepreneur in Melbourne, Australia, and have a conversation where we would never have crossed paths probably outside of, this medium of the podcast. And so I think there's a lot of magic in that. And I also think for entrepreneurs and leaders who are really looking to take a little bit more control over the trajectory of their career, the growth of their business, this it kind of offers them a great chance to earn their way towards doing that rather than having to wait for somebody else to say, it's their time.
Yeah, really interesting, Rusty. And the world is changing and that intersection. And that's why I was curious. I mean, I'm an author myself and I'm very proud of my book, obviously, and I did it for a reason. But the world is changing and I wanted to hear from you whether you thought the book was still relevant. So what I want to share with you is what I think the power of a book is, or what I love about books. I want to test that with you and bounce off that and see where we go. So for me, when someone writes a book, through the very process, if they've written a book, there's a good chance that they are an authority in their field. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had the confidence to be able to get out there and write it. So the word author and authority sound pretty familiar there, don't they? Right? There's a root there. But what I find is really powerful is if someone's gone through the process of writing a book, it means that they've taken that smart idea that they've got. They're clearly clever, but they've been able to codify it in a way that they can communicate it to the masses. And that very process is almost organizing those thoughts. And if you're listening at home and you might either know someone that is one of those clever clogs and you go, that person should really write a book, or you might have a book inside you yourself. One of the magic parts of this is the process itself. So by going through and working out how are you going to structure your thoughts in a way that you're going to communicate it in a book, at the end of it, you're able to articulate with much more clarity your idea, your concept, your beliefs, because you've been through that process. How does that sit with you?
It sits exactly right. I mean, the process of taking intellectual property and creating a framework that a reader can then take and personalize in their life that allows them to, take those principles and apply them. I think there's so much magic in that. And I would guess 90% plus of your audience has had write a book on their to-do list for the last couple of decades. I mean, for most people, it is one of those boxes we want to check. And in my experience, Mick, not just the process of actually writing the book itself, but the process of spreading the ideas once it comes out. I mean, your book's been out about 18 months at this point, has gotten great reviews. I know it's an Amazon bestseller and, has gotten a really good response. You're just getting started with that book. I mean, that book's going to be something that allows you to make an impact for the next decade. And so part of my encouragement to your audience listening to this is the enormity of that line on your to-do list of write a book. I know feels just overwhelming probably to many people listening to this. And it really comes down to, just like exercise, it is a daily activity where at first you're just getting words on the page and you may not know exactly how they're going to be organized, but get that content out on a page. And what you'll find is a month, 2 months, 3 months in, you start to have the beginnings of a bit of a framework that can then be revised and edited from there. How did you approach it with your book? I mean, was it that kind of exercise type process for you?
Yeah, I was pretty methodical. So I deeply thought about my avatar, who I was writing for. And my book was written for first-time leaders. And I had to wind back the clock and think about when I was a first-time leader. And I had to, I'm going to use one of your words for a second here, I had to park my ego at the door and go, what did I not know back then? And what did I need to know that I didn't know? And I wanted to think about almost a from-to position of what does my avatar know before they read the book, and what do I want them to know, do, and think after they've read my book. So I started deeply getting into the mind of my avatar first. And then from there, I had to remember that, I'm a leader with 30 years experience now. You don't jump into the 30-year point. You have to wind all the way back and remember the things that are second nature to you now, but are going to be valuable to that person that's going through that tricky transition into leadership. So I had to be very kind of almost humble in all of that to go, these are the things that I needed to know. Then I did a mind map. I went, okay, so if that's the journey I want to take them on, here are all of the topics. From the mind map, I did an outline to go, okay, like this. So on that topic, they need to know this, they need to know this. So the whole thing was bullet pointed before I wrote a single sentence, if you like. And then once I sat down in writing mode, I'm going to say, Rusty, maybe I'm an exception here, but I'm going to say that the words flowed out of me because I put in the work to get that structure right before I started writing.
Love it. And, the process that I used on my first book was something that another best-selling author, Annie F. Downs, taught me. And that was, once you've got your table of contents for the book, before you've written much, she recommended putting a poster board for each chapter around a conference room or around a room. So you have 12 chapters, you have 12 poster boards, and then you get different color Post-it notes. So green Post-it notes are the stories you're going to tell in that chapter. Pink Post-it notes are the individuals that you want to interview or quote in those chapters, et cetera. And so it allows you to kind of visually make sure ahead of time, all right, I have 3 greens. I don't have any pinks there. I need to think about who I want to interview in that chapter. And in other words, you plan it out ahead of time. And then, as you mentioned, it flows. So some people that works really well. Others, it's just more getting in the habit of just kind of starting the process of writing it. So I could not recommend, even if you never publish the book, and I hope people listening to this will write and publish a book, but even if you never publish it, the exercise of kind of creating that framework, that intellectual property is going to make you a better communicator. It's going to make you a better coach. It's going to make you a better teacher. But if you go to the step that, that Mick did and others have of actually publishing the book, one of the things that you're going to find is there is no better way to extend your impact at scale, but also to empower people who know and love you to refer you, because that book is such an easy thing to pass along to somebody that they know struggling with that issue, or that somebody that they think is a good potential client for you. So it's a game changer also on the business growth and marketing side as well.
So I'm absolutely loving this word impact, and this is the next thing that I love about books is that they do stand the test of time. They'll go on forever. Podcasts, they'll come and go, and sometimes they'll be very timely, as in they'll be relevant today and they won't be relevant 2 years from now, etc. Not always, but there are different media, but there's something special about a book that stands the test of time. And one of the things that you just said about the pass-on effect, there's also this element of third-party trust that comes about. Now, here's an interesting thing as an author, I'd love your view on this, is I know, like my book is only 18 months old, but I know now I've got lots of stories of people that have bought it, have read it, it was impactful for them, and then they've passed it on to someone else. And people might be thinking, oh, damn, that's a missed book sale there. But think about the impact of that. Because if someone has taken the time to go, hey, Rusty, this book was impactful for me, I think it'll be impactful for you. It starts with third-party trust before the person even opens it. And therefore, the impact is going to be there. How does that sit with you?
Well, I think you're exactly right. I mean, this is part of what we talk about in terms of being positioned not as an operator with something to sell, but instead as that thought leader with something to teach. It's the authority by association that happens when I see your name on the front cover of the book, or I see you've been featured in Forbes, or you've given a TEDx talk. And what happens there, to me, it is an unfair advantage that you create for yourself in your business area. And that is everybody else is positioned with a suit and tie bio and kind of the same educational credentials. And when I Google Mick's name, I can see, okay, wow, he wrote the book on the topic. He's a speaker. He's got a podcast. There's a really different image that's created there. It's not of Mick saying, hey, look how smart I am. It's actually instead of Mick as the guy with something to teach. It's somebody that I'm excited to get that appointment with. And so part of what I want leaders who are listening and watching this to really think about is, what kind of trust are you creating with potential talent, with potential customers, with potential partners before you get in the room? I know for many of you, once you get in the room, you're going to close that sale. You're going to, bring that potential employee on. And the reality for many of you that I want to make sure you understand today is the first impression most people are getting of you is not happening in person. It's not happening over the phone. Whether you like it or not, that first impression is happening online. And number one, don't you want to own it? And number two, don't you want to be really intentional about what it is? And I would hope so.
That's really cool, Rusty. I definitely want to unpack that in a moment. I want to confirm to you about the door opening effect. So it absolutely opens doors for meetings, if you like. It also opens doors for things like, I know you're a keynote speaker as well, getting bookings for keynote speaking gigs. All of these, when you've got a book under your belt that performed well, it's a massive door opener and almost like an instant credibility check. So I'll tell you a story. A friend of mine, she listens to the show, by the way, but a friend of mine was taking me around her office, and the business day was just starting and we were about to have a meeting together, and she was just walking around and introducing me to a few people. And she said to this one girl that had started earlier that day, "Oh, this is Mick Spears." And she went, "Oh, the author." And it kind of floored me. So the first impression of Mick Spears to that person started well before she had ever seen me face to face. So it is a door opener. It's a credibility builder. And the first impression is starting before you even arrive. That's 3 really key things there.
It's an unfair advantage. And you're exactly right. You are moving from being perceived again as that, leader trying to grow a company or individual trying to sell something. And instead, you're the author with something to teach. You're the thought leader with an impact to make. And I know, again, leaders who are listening to this, if you haven't written the book yet, if you haven't gotten visible, the reality is for most of you, you're making an impact behind the scenes at a really high level. You're a servant leader. You're serving your team. You're over delivering for clients. And the reality, Mick, as you know, that's table stakes today. Of course, you've got to be a great leader with your team, with your clients. And I think the big thing I want to advocate for today is the urgency for leaders to understand that it's no longer enough to just do that behind the scenes, because we're in an environment right now where trust in your company, in your institution, in your nonprofit is at an all-time low. Right? Gallup did a big study last year that showed trust in institutions, in businesses is at an all-time low. So we don't trust your company anymore. We're more skeptical than we've ever been, but we're willing to trust you if you are visible to us in an authentic, mission-driven way. And so I think for, Mick, some of the best leaders I know, you mentioned the phrase personal branding or thought leadership, and they either give me a grimace or, I can just tell it's a recoil. And the reason is for most leaders, when you think of those phrases, our minds immediately go to people that are building, ego-driven, hey, look at me kind of brands. And so to be crystal clear for your audience, when I'm advocating for them to build thought leadership, to get visible, I'm not looking to build a, hey, look at how smart you are kind of brand. What I am looking to do is to have you be the messenger, not the message, because the speed to trust for you is dramatically quicker than it is for the business. And in my experience, Mick, it allows people to punch above their weight class in terms of trust, in terms of growth, when they kind of go in that thought leader with something to teach approach rather than, again, kind of the more commoditized operator approach.
Yeah, I think there are some limiting beliefs around that. Let's start unpacking a little bit more. Let's start with real basics. Let's say the average leader out there, why do you think it's important? What are the positive impacts that come from this thought leadership? Let's start with that. And then we can talk about this impact, not ego element of it.
Yeah, so I think the most important outcome that comes from thought leadership is what I would argue is the single most important thing that a leader has to be able to build within and on behalf of their organization, and that is trust. Trust is the foundation of every single thing that happens in terms of relationship building, growing a business. And for many leaders listening to this, they are doing this in a non-scalable way. One-to-one, one-to-few in a boardroom, once somebody walks in the door of their business, et cetera. And what we're seeing is the game changer is if you can build trust on behalf of your organization before somebody decides to raise their hand for that interview, before they decide to take the meeting. Just as a quick example of this, Mick. So one of my favorite examples, we talk about her in the book, is Patty Brennan. So Patty is one of the largest female-owned financial advisory firms in the country. She has built a huge, huge book of business. And, like many areas, financial advisory firms, for most people, are among the most commoditized thing that exists. It's hard to differentiate one from another. And let's say, for example, that, I just sold my business and I've gotten referred to 5 different financial advisors. What I'm going to do when I get referred to those advisors is I'm going to go Google their name, right? I'm going to make sure my friend is not the outlier and having a great experience with them. And so if I Google those financial advisors, 4 of the 5 of them, I'm going to get a bio page on an Edward Jones website with a nice headshot, the educational credentials. Maybe I get a LinkedIn profile. In other words, it's not negative. It's just the most commoditized image that could possibly exist for a financial advisor. I'm in the position of power. I'm interviewing them on what's different that they can offer me. When I Google Patty's name and I land on Patty's website, instead of getting the stock photo with, the retired couple walking down the beach with their grandkids or, some city skyline, I've got a hero shot of Patty up on stage and we've got a Forbes Women logo behind her. In other words, she's mid keynote speech. And what happens there is, I don't know, Patty, I do have an image in my mind for somebody that's on a stage like that, next to a logo like that. Underneath it, I can see, wow, she's been featured in the Financial Times and Barron's, et cetera. These other four, again, I'm in the position of power. With Patty, when I reach out to her firm, you need me to wait 3 months for an appointment? I'm just feeling lucky to get in the room with her. And so I think part of what I want people to think about here around trust is Patty has built trust to a level because she's working on a book, because she has a podcast, because she's a speaker, that instead of coming in asking her to tell me why she's qualified, I'm immediately ready for her to prescribe a solution to my problem because I already trust that she's the person to teach me on this. And so I think that's, for me, Mick, one of the things that, and again, I'd like to dive into this in a real pragmatic way for your audience in terms of helping them to think through an online brand audit, how they're represented right now. But that is a really different image than almost everybody else in her space has.
All right. I want to share with you what I'm taking away from what you're saying, Rusty. And I want you to reflect on this and let me know whether I'm hitting the mark here or not. So whether you're a entrepreneur out there running your own business or you're a VP inside a big multinational, etc., there's a good chance that you're in commerce, right? You want people to buy your goods, services, products, projects, whatever it is that you are doing, there's a good chance that you're in a commerce relationship with others. And what it comes down to is people buy from people they know, like, and trust. To build know, for them to know you, you need a presence. Whether you like it or not, you need to have a personal brand and you need to have a presence out there because just like Rusty said, before you take that meeting, people are Googling you. They want to know who you are and what you stand for. Like, for them to like you, they need to connect to something. Connecting to something could be, oh yeah, that Rusty, he talks about things on LinkedIn like I talk about things. Like we've got common values here. Yeah, I like that guy. He's personable. There's a connection there. And trust is both professional and personal credibility. And that trust might come from third-party trust where they've heard others, oh, well, they're good enough to be on Forbes. They're good enough for me. Or, oh yeah, they spoke at that conference or I saw this review, etc. It can be from third-party trust. Or it can be just from trust of credibility that, yeah, this person's written a book. They know what they're talking about. Other people have trusted them, so I'm going to trust them. So they need to know, like, and trust you. To know you, you need to be present. To like you, there needs to be a connection. To trust you, there needs to be credibility. How does that sit with you?
You nailed it. The one thing I want to zero in on, Mick, that I think is really important for leaders listening to this is the phrase, whether you like it or not. In other words, I talk to so many leaders who say, I don't want to worry about social media. I don't want to worry about any of this. I want to put my head down and over deliver for clients and team members. And again, what I want to do just virtually kind of reaching through here to your audience is sort of grab them by the shoulders and let them know, again, this is not about not over delivering for your team. Those are table stakes. You've got to keep doing that. But what I'm really making sure that I try to hammer home for your audience is whether you like it or not, the first impression that people have of you when they are referred to you, when they're thinking about taking the job, when they're thinking about taking the meeting, is happening on Google. From there, if we're lucky, it's then happening on your website. It's then happening on your LinkedIn profile. If that image is happening there, whether you like it or not, number one, don't you want to own it? And number two, don't you want to be really intentional about the image that's created there? And again, number one, this is about trust. But number two, if you've got a message that you want to get out that can impact people's lives, that you know from the people who deal with you directly, this has sent their life off in a different trajectory, don't you want to reach more people at scale? And so I think for me, those are the two motivations that I want people to think about here is, number one, it's not a nice to have anymore. It is a must if you're going to build trust with an audience that doesn't trust your logo anymore. Number two, if you want to make an impact at scale, there's never been a better way to do it than this.
Yeah. All right. Brilliant, Rusty. Now, I want to double down on that a little bit. And you spoke about it before. There are some people out there that have limiting beliefs about this. I'm going to say it's cringeworthy for them, that they really go, oh, do I have to? this kind of thing. And part of that is because there are some people out there that either they've seen others that are narcissistic, they're egotistical, etc. It's all about them, etc., etc. So unpack this impact, not ego element for us.
Yeah, we've got an authority matrix that we use in the book. And if you think about the x-axis is visibility, the y-axis is leadership impact. So bottom left quadrant is the top-down leader. So the behind-the-scenes leader who is just a terrible boss. And we call that as disdain that's limited to in person. The top quadrant, which is high visibility, low quality leadership, is what many people who hear personal brand or thought leadership think of. Mick, and that is the ego-driven influencer. In other words, the person that our LinkedIn might be littered with every week, where they're sitting on a Ferrari or they're on a yacht. In other words, it's a hey, look at me kind of brand. And so to be crystal clear again, that may be where your mind goes. That is the last thing that I am advising you to do. And anything where you're doing anything other than teaching, giving value, educating is not serving the outcomes that I know you're looking for. The bottom right quadrant, which is the one where I'm expecting most of your audience is sitting, is the behind the scenes servant leader. Their heads down, over delivering for clients, for their team. They're constantly told they're the best kept secret in their industry. They're probably 95% referral driven, and they've got a solid business or they've got a solid career, but they are not moving at the speed that they want to move. And they've got bigger goals and they want to try to really bend the curve on how quickly they're getting there. Where I want them to go is to really shift up to that top right quadrant, which is the mission-driven thought leader. And the mission-driven thought leader is taking all of the great stuff that's happening behind the scenes and really putting it out at a bit more scale. So when I say putting it out at a bit more scale, really pragmatically, what I mean there, Mick, is you are finding a way through earned media, rented media, and owned media. And again, we can unpack each of those to do the same stuff you're doing right now behind the scenes. It's the same coaching that's taking place. It's the same wisdom that you're passing along to clients, but you're putting it out in a way that if I'm thinking about taking that job at your company, I can listen to that podcast interview that you've done. I can get a sense for what kind of leader I'm about to be working under. If I'm thinking about, taking that meeting with you as a potential client, I can watch a quick video where I get a sense of, do I like this person? Do I trust this person? And so, Mick, I think, again, for many of the leaders that I talk to, we've got to get them over, number one, the immediate thought that this is an ego stroke versus what it is, which is a trust accelerator. And number two, the other big thing that I hear a lot is kind of imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome for me takes one of two sort of subcategories. Either it's somebody that just thinks, all right, I'm too late to the game on this. I don't know what I would add to the discussion on leadership. I should have started that podcast when I first thought about it 6 years ago or whatever it might be. And I can sort of talk through the antidote to that. The other thing is the person that thinks, you know what? I'm not sure I've got anything valuable to say on this topic. I don't know that I can really pass along something that's going to build a big audience. And what I would encourage people who are, maybe working through some of those limiting beliefs is just to understand that there's two things that you're bringing to the table that nobody else can bring to the table. Number one is your perspective, your unique experience, your intellectual property around whatever your topic area is. The second thing is your personality. And I find, Mick, a lot of leaders, they think, when we're asking them to get a bit more visible, a lot of them think they've got to kind of play this role of what they think a thought leader should sound like or, how they should write. And actually what works is the opposite. So what I want you to do, if you're going to start that podcast or get active on LinkedIn, I want you to be more of yourself. The only reason for me to follow Mick versus the other hundreds of leadership podcasts that are out there is because I like his personality. I like the storytelling. I like his perspective. And the more that he weaves that in and leans into his unique personality, the more he grows an audience around that. And so I find that to be, for a lot of leaders, empowering and maybe even a bit more fun than they thought it would be.
All right. There's so many things to unpack there, Rusty. I love it. I've got this great picture of the quadrant that you're talking about. And I agree with you. I think it's the ones with high visibility and no value. They're not bringing anything to the table. They're the cringeworthy ones that everyone worries about. And there are ones out there. You made a mention before about you're not there to sell. You're there to spread a message and to have impact. When people go instantly to, I use social media to sell, it actually, for me, has the opposite effect. If someone starts a relationship with trying to sell to me, the chances of me doing business with them actually goes negative, not positive. It's going to go backwards. Right, so get out of that quadrant where it's not about being highly visible with nothing to say. But if you're one of those ones that's got a message to say, you've got some impact, you've got some value to share, and you're not visible, well, you're leaving things on the table. You're not getting the impact and reach that you could have if you were to park your imposter syndrome at the door and some of your limiting beliefs at the door and get out there with your message. So if we go up into the top right hand quadrant, you said this word, mission-driven thought leader. So tell me more about mission-driven, about purpose. How is this going to help the people out there channel what they might do?
Sure. One of the first just pragmatic things that I want people to think about here, Mick, is think about the first image that somebody gets when they're referred to you. So if I land on your LinkedIn profile, just really pragmatically, 99% of professionals that I see, that LinkedIn profile is a rundown of their skill set or just their experience. In other words, it's kind of a virtual resume, for lack of a better term. And the way I want people to think about their position, don't tell me your qualifications, don't tell me your skill set. Tell me the mission that you're on. What are you passionate about? Are you passionate about helping, parents break through limiting beliefs, or you're helping whatever your industry is? Give me the missional side and a little bit of personality to it, and then mix that in with some of the authority by association that I was talking about there. Nick, I find that kind of the fine line I want people to walk with their brand. Essentially, on one side of the coin, I want the visuals to say what I don't want them to say about themselves, which is, top of her category thought leader, main stage speaker, wrote the book on the topic. In other words, this is somebody I can trust to teach me on this topic. And then the flip side, the entirety of somebody's content strategy from the book to the blog and beyond is all mission-driven thought leadership. If you never take another step with me, I'm going to leave you better off as a result of having read this blog post or listened to this interview. But as you probably know, Mick, that audience is not interested in the teaching until they understand you're the person to teach them on this topic. And that's why we got to do both sides of that coin. You do this pretty well on your website from my perspective. When I land on, mickspears.com, I don't know Mick, that first image is, hero shot of Mick up on stage giving a speech. And again, I don't know Mick, I do have an image in my mind of somebody that's on a stage like that, giving a talk like that. And so it positions him, again, not as somebody selling me something, which he's not, but it positions him as somebody I can learn from. Right? Somebody that I'm about to get value from. And so that's an important hack. And we can go into the weeds of this if it's helpful. But the other thing that I want people to think about, Mick, and this is going to sound really, really in the weeds, but is foundationally important for leaders. If I am looking for you by name, the first question I want you to ask yourself is, can you be found? Okay, so David Meerman Scott, who wrote the foreword to our books, really well-known PR and marketing author, his name's David Scott. And what he recognized really early in his career was his name is like a piece of digital real estate. And if you think about David Scott as a piece of digital real estate, there's a lot of David Scotts standing on that piece of real estate. And when he got started, he recognized, several of them were way out front in terms of visibility. And what he knew was if people were getting referred to him or somebody saw him speak and wanted to go find him, they had to pack a lunch and go 8 pages deep on Google to find him. And so what he did was he added in his middle name, David Meerman Scott. And when he did that, what he did, Mick, is he walked across the street to a piece of real estate that was empty. And with the first brick that he lays in that foundation, he owns search. And so Michael B. Jordan, who's a really well-known actor just in Creed, his name is Michael Jordan. And again, he recognized early on that was a piece of real estate that had a skyscraper on it. He was never going to outrun that. So if you are listening to this podcast right now and you are not lucky enough to have a unique name like Mick Spears or Rusty Shelton, and your name's Michael Jordan or your name's David Scott, one of the things I want you to think about pragmatically is, does it make sense for you to change your name? In other words, does it make sense for you to add that middle initial or middle name so that, number one, when I'm looking for you by name, I can find you, but also as I refer people to you, that they can find you. And then one last thing I would say on that, Mick, and then I'd love any questions that you might have. If you don't own your name as a .com, first name, last name.com, or first name, middle initial.com, when you wrap up this podcast today, go to GoDaddy.com set up an account, reserve your name. Even if you're not ready to build a website for it yet, go ahead and grab it. While you're there, get your kids' names, get your grandkids' names. That real estate's valuable today. It's only going to get more valuable in the future.
There's lots of great takeaways there, Rusty. I'd like to unpack 3 things there. So the first one was about coming back to the purpose-driven thought leader. And what I'm taking away there is your ability to communicate with clarity about what you stand for. Communicate with clarity about what you stand for. So it's an element of niching down and being able to articulate your purpose, your values, and your beliefs. Because if you're able to do that with clarity, you will attract people around you that believe in the things that you believe, right? So it's not about selling again. It's about purpose. It's about values. It's about beliefs. And that's what's going to build know, like, and trust there. The second one was then, I'm going to say about the personal brand, because you were almost unpacking my website as an example. What are you projecting? Are you projecting of someone that's trying to sell or projecting someone that's got something interesting to say? So you're out there to have something interesting to say, not to sell. Have a look at your LinkedIn profile, have a look at your website, whatever, and think about what is it projecting. And if it's projecting, I'm going to be a salesperson, I'm going to ram sales down your throat, you're going to be alienating people before you even start. And then the third one, can I be found? So purpose, values, and beliefs. What is my brand telling about me, telling people about me, and can I be found? That's 3 really key ones there. I think we've got to go to a really curious one. Let's say that there is someone listening to this, Rusty, and they're going, yeah, I don't really have a profile and I don't do all of these things and perhaps I should. Where do they start?
Well, so I think there are a few things that they should think about doing. Number one, Nick, the quickest way for somebody to own search around their name, if they're not ready to build the website, obviously it would be the greatest thing they could do. RustyShelton.com or MickSpears.com, et cetera. If you're not ready to do that, the quickest way for you to own search is a LinkedIn profile, and a LinkedIn profile that is created around a name that is not on a crowded piece of real estate. So again, if it's David Scott, we've gone to David Meerman Scott. So get that brand name right. And by the way, it's a quick sidebar, Mick. Once you decide what your brand name is going to be, if we're going with that middle initial, if we're Michael B. Jordan, that is full stop your name. That's on your email signature. That's on your business card. That's on the front cover of your book. In other words, don't scatter bricks on a bunch of pieces of digital real estate. Let's get them all on one consistent piece of real estate. The second thing to think about though, Mick, is that LinkedIn profile, as you know, it used to be the virtual resume. I mean, in a lot of ways, it kind of looks like a website at this point. And so in other words, you can do that big header image, hero shot. You can do a full narrative bio. So max out your LinkedIn. And again, the number of leaders, Mick, that I get to a LinkedIn profile and I see, that sunset picture off the coast of California, or I've got a generic corporate logo up there. Again, what you've got to keep in mind, somebody that's been referred to you, your logo means nothing to them if they don't know your company yet. And so you're missing a golden opportunity to instead give me an image that puts you in a position that connotes authority. The gold standard ideally is we've got that Patty Brennan hero shot and we've got Forbes or TEDx or pick the event. If we don't have something on that level, give me a picture of you with podcast headphones on and a mic in front. In other words, something in a setting that tells me, all right, I don't know, Rusty, I do have an image for somebody that, again, is in that kind of setting. So something that presents you as that teacher versus the operator. Within that LinkedIn profile, Mick, just to spend another maybe 30 seconds on this, LinkedIn now gives you the ability, in addition to the resume, to do sort of that full narrative bio. And as I mentioned earlier, don't give me the Rusty's great at Excel and speaks 3 languages. Give me the mission behind what you're doing. Give me the why. Give me a little bit of backstory. And ideally, we talk about this principle of authority by association in the book, Mick, and that is ideally what you want to be able to do is associate yourself with brands that your audience already knows, trusts, and respects. Right. And so that's where if you've been quoted in Forbes, if you've won XYZ award, if you have published a book, in other words, the more brands that you can say, okay, Mick has taken the stage at XYZ. Well, what happens there is, I don't know, Mick, I do know those conferences. And so he's along for the ride with that. So for the leaders listening to this, they may be thinking, yeah, Rusty, it'd be great if I had that Forbes hit, or it'd be great if I'd been on the TEDx stage. I haven't yet. Well, my guess is for many of you, there are clients you have worked with through the years. Some of them you may not be able to mention, but some of them maybe you can, and maybe you've, received that certain award. In other words, just look for brands in specific opportunities to associate yourself with some of those that your target audience knows, trusts, and respects. And if you don't have any right now, cool. Let's go get them over the next couple of years, and let's understand that the remarketing of those is really the magic.
Yeah, I love it, Rusty. So the key takeaways I'm taking there are consistency of brand, starting with the thing you said about name. Make sure your name is consistently everywhere in each channel that you're using. Then there's consistency of brand from what you're projecting. Does every bit of image, does your tagline, does everything project what you're trying to project, where you want to see yourself in the world? And then there's the alignment to purpose and mission again. I'll just share a few thoughts with you as I do this, right? So when I think of Simon Sinek, I think most people go, oh, he's the start with why guy, because he's very niche down and everyone knows what he stands for, and that's his big thing, right? He's done a few other things like leaders eat last and all this kind of stuff, but a lot of what he does comes back to start with why. I think about someone like Daniel Goleman, and I instantly go, oh, the father of emotional intelligence, right? So he niches down in emotional intelligence so far that his name becomes almost synonymous with emotional intelligence. If I think about, let's say, there's so many that I could be thinking, I don't want to pick a friend and then offend someone. But if I think about someone that's gotten out there with their author, with their book, etc., and you start just associating with the person, almost becomes a walking tagline. Simon, the start with why guy, right? So if you end up with this narrative that trails off your name, that means that you've niched down very clearly and people know what you stand for and they know what mission you're on. I will give one because he is a dear friend, Stephen Shedleski. So he's publishing his book right now around speak up culture. So whenever I think of Shed, I go, Shed, psychological safety, instantly. It's instant. It's not even I have to think, Shed, he's a nice guy, isn't he? No, it's Shed, psychological safety. So if you get that association with purpose, values and beliefs to your name, then you're really getting somewhere. And then to this point of where to start, brand association. So if you've done the work to think about what you stand for and what your mission is and where you want to go, where you can start is actually brand association with those people. So if you're listening to this and go, yeah, I am passionate about psychological safety, well, go and start following Amy Edmondson, Kim Scott, Stephen Shedleski. Go and make comments on their posts. Start building some of your own credibility in that way by being associated with the circles that they swim in. How does that sit with you, Rusty?
It sits well. And I think, Mick, I would encourage people to even take a step further. And in addition to, I think it's great advice to start commenting and adding, but think about, so I talk a lot about relationship-driven content. And if you're a leader in a space, psychological safety, let's say, that's what you want to really wade into. You want to help people in that space. One of the best things you can do is start curating content from the leaders in that space. So whether you're doing a podcast like Mick, or you start a LinkedIn newsletter and you review the big books in that space, and you do it from the perspective of somebody that's just bringing great expertise to the table, don't discount the amount of magnetism that happens to the people you want to build relationships with when you bring value. I see a lot of people, Mick, that use a podcast or an interview series as a way to build peer-to-peer interactions with people. I coach college students here and there. And one of the things I always encourage them to do is if you're a junior or senior in college and you want to get a job in the engineering space in Austin, Texas, well, you could do what everybody else is doing, which is push resumes out, or you could flip it and you could start a LinkedIn newsletter and pick out the 30 biggest engineering firms in Austin where you would want to go get a job, and reach out to the CEOs and say, hey, I've got a LinkedIn newsletter where I'm interviewing CEOs of successful engineering firms. I'd love to get your perspective on what's changed in the industry. And what happens there is it starts for a win. It starts with a win for the other person, and you start to pull those people to you. And of course, what happens over time, Mick, is those CEOs are turning around, hey, what can I do for you? How can I reciprocate? How can I help? And one of our biggest clients is one of the fastest growing regional banks here in the city of Austin. You walk in the door to the new branch in downtown Austin. It's all the normal stuff you'd expect from a modern bank branch. The thing that stands out, there's a podcast studio in the bank branch. And the bank president uses that podcast as a way to curate conversations with leaders here in Austin. And it's not about, hey, tell me why our bank is the best bank. It's not an endorsement. It's a pure peer-to-peer conversation that at worst builds goodwill, at best drives business.
I love it. All right. Another great example of value-driven. All right. So not selling, but value-driven thought leadership that is going to attract an audience. It's going to attract a tribe, which I think is wonderful. So I'm going to summarize a little bit, Rusty, as we bring ourselves to a close. All right. So the first thing I want to say to you is you are a brand, whether you like it or not. And a big takeaway for me today from Rusty is that first impressions in a digital age start before you've even met the person. So that's a scary thought, but it's one that you need to embrace. First impressions start before you even meet the person these days, because they will Google you. They will try to understand who you are and what you stand for. That this is all about know, like, and trust. So building thought leadership is about building that know, like, and trust so that you can do business with people, let's say. And business can come in all kinds of things. You might be sitting there going, but I don't sell. Well, think about some of the examples Rusty said. You might be looking to join a company in the future. Know, like, and trust. People are going to employ you if they know, like, and trust you. You might be trying to attract a talented workforce to your business. People are going to join you on the mission if they know, like, and trust you. Or you could indeed be looking to do commerce and sell business to business or person to person, and people will buy from you if they know, like, and trust you. And how do they do that? Know, visibility, like, connection, trust, credibility. So get out there with a message. Don't get out there trying to sell. Get out there with a message and build your thought leadership around something that's mission-driven, where you can articulate your purpose, your values, your beliefs in a way that people will warm to you and want to do business with you. Get started. My next part is get started. So okay, Rusty and I are authors. We do podcasts. We're probably a little bit further down the track than a lot of you, but you got to start somewhere. So get started. Go and find your tribe. Go and make your message in the world where people can start resonating, going, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that person. And I remember what they said and what they stood for. You got to get started. Take the first step. Any final things that you would add to that summary, Rusty, before we get into our rapid round?
I love that. I love what you just walked through there. And I think the only two things I would add is your brand is created before you get in the room or before somebody decides to reach out. What's remarkable is this is even true when you're meeting somebody in person. So if I get connected to another CEO in Austin for a lunch, what am I going to do before I walk in the door for that lunch, right? I'm in my truck scrolling through a quick Google search on their name. And that initial image that I get from that Google search in the 5 minutes before I walk in the door is going to be really difficult for them to change in the next hour that we spend together. And so just understand that online image matters even when you are meeting people in person. So that would be one thing. I love your know, like, and trust kind of framework, and just take that a step further. So know being the visibility at scale. Like, I think when you look at building rapport with somebody before you get in the room, right? And it's easy to build rapport for many of you once you have a chance to deal with somebody directly. But the way that you build rapport and get somebody to like you is authenticity. And what I often will recommend to leaders is the more vulnerable and the more self-deprecating that you're willing to be with your content, the quicker your audience is going to grow. Right? Don't sit back and just teach me about all the great things that happen. If you're going to teach me about culture, start me off with the biggest flat on your face mistake you ever made with culture, and then work me back to the aha from there. So you're going to build rapport much more quickly when you're willing to be vulnerable and self-deprecate. And then the trust is that authority by association that Mick and I have talked about. It's leveraging things that irrationally build and accelerate trust for you, like places where you've spoken, like media that has featured you. And my encouragement for leaders is do not discount the enormity of trust that it accelerates when you are able to bring some of those things to a more visible place.
Yeah, brilliant, Rusty. Look, I've absolutely adored this conversation. So many great takeaways for everyone to really stop and think and reflect on where you are on this continuum. I'll call it a continuum, and what you can do as your next step. So thank you so much, Rusty. I'd like to take us now to our rapid round. So what's the one thing that you know now, Rusty Shelton, that you wish you knew when you were 20?
I think that it'll all work out. I stress myself out a lot on, what am I not doing that I should be doing? How is it, am I going to make it? Is it, and I've still got a long way to go, but I think I wasted a lot of time stressed and anxious about career and providing for my family and that kind of stuff that, I wish I'd have known that. So that would probably be my thing. It's going to work out.
Yeah, I love it. I read something yesterday that stuck with me, which was no amount of regret will change the past. No amount of anxiety will change the future.
Yep. Love it. That's exactly right.
Really cool. All right. What's your favorite quote?
Favorite quote is culture eats strategy for breakfast. Peter Drucker, old school favorite, but built both my agencies, and our new one is really built alongside my partners around that as our central core philosophy.
I love it. Now, as a publisher, dangerous ground here. What's your favorite book?
My favorite book's this one behind me, The One Thing. This is a book written by Gary Keller, who's co-founder of Keller Williams Realty, and Jay Papazan, who's a friend based here in Austin. The central question of this book, I'm just going to mention really briefly, Mick, because I think it's such a game-changing question for leaders. What is the one thing so that by doing it, everything else is either easier or unnecessary? And if you think about decision-making almost across every area of your life, Gary credits that one question to how he focused on the high leverage activities in every area of his leadership. And I'm sort of manic about trying to ask that question around everything that I try to do in life. And hopefully it's helpful to your audience as well.
Yeah, I love it. It's like a meta version or a laser focused version of put first things first. What's the one thing that would change the game right now and would make everything else better? Yeah, love it. All right. And finally, there's going to be people in the audience right now. Some of them are going to be challenged, I've got to say, by today's conversation. They're going to be thinking, I need to do this. I don't know where to start. There's going to be people out there that are going to be challenged by our discussion today, Rusty. If people would like to know more about you and the support that you do, the work that you do, how do people find you?
Sure. Well, thank you. And I do a lot of speaking, a lot of keynotes and private workshops. So if you go to rustyshelton.com, you can learn a little bit more about that work. We also, alongside the launch of the book, if you go to theauthorityadvantagebook.com, fill out a little bit of information, we're going to send you a free audio or digital version of the new book. So hopefully for members of your audience that hear this, that want to go a little deeper, we're happy to do that. And then my agency here in Austin, Texas, zilkermedia.com. For those of you who have a company that's really looking to do this the right way, love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, brilliant, Rusty. Well, thank you for doing exactly what we've said. You've brought a lot of thought leadership to our discussion today. Thank you so much for your wisdom and insights and for your very practical tips as to what people can do to get started or to move themselves down this continuum of mission-driven thought leadership. Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much, Meg.
Thank you for listening to The Leadership Project at mixbeers.com. A huge call out to Faris Sadek for his video editing of all of our video content, and to all of the team at TLP. Joanne Goes On, Gerald Calabo, and my amazing wife, Say Spears. I could not do this show without you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project YouTube channel, where we bring you interesting videos each and every week. And you can follow us on social, particularly on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Now, in the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and join us on this journey as we learn together and lead together.